Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this next story. It's from a very dear friend of mine, Kat Fitzpatrick, who is an amazing writer and brilliant encaustic painter. Her story is called The Temple. From as far back as memory could carry her, this strange place had been home. High above the sea, at almost 2,000 feet, the temple devoted to Aphrodite perched. A steep and rocky path connected the town of Corinth with the windy hilltop. Diamonds dancing on cerulean water briefly hypnotized and gentled seekers who had managed the climb. All came in search of heart's ease. One could say it was the specialty of the house. Behind a burnished screen of acanthus leaves wrought in gold was a simple pallet of blankets on the floor. A 6-foot length of red silk lay on top. It was all she had to remember her mother and the teachings she had imparted to her only child. The light from the open air way above shimmered in the heat, reflecting a soft crimson glow on the alabaster columns. They took on the color of rosy skin. The small inner room was barely 12 feet square. Sophia knew every vein and mark in the stone and the many ways the light played on the surface throughout the mornings. Mornings were when they came, the men bearing gifts for Aphrodite. This temple was devoted to her. From Sophia's youngest days, she had been trained for this, born to this, some said, in service to the goddess Aphrodite, bound to this temple through blood and calling. The blood and the calling both came through her mother Zoe. She barely remained in Sophia's memory as a flash of dark hair and the softest hands, still holding the power to comfort her night fears. She had brought a 4-year-old Sophia to this very temple, hoping that her sisters would agree to care for her tiny daughter as the wasting disease rendered her powerless over her body or the care of her beloved daughter. She had lasted 6 months before they carried her body to the stand of almond trees down there where they laid her down. Now, Sophia was 14 and fully initiated into the way of the goddess. She was often able to touch up to 5 seekers before exhaustion overtook her and she passed into a deep sleep lasting several hours. The ritual used all of her hands, her arms, her eyes, her mind, her breath, her legs and feet, and finally, her womb. The first seeker of the day made his way to the small room, carrying a ceramic oil lamp as an offering. Sophia took it and gestured for him to remove his cloak and lay down on his back, casting his eyes upward to the light. She had replaced the red silk with 2 layers of cotton weave, one below and one resting lightly on top of his body. She knelt at the head of the pallet, looking down at the pale moon of a man. He was restlessly adjusting his body, seeking comfort in a hostile world of his own making. His eyes were closed after more sleepless nights than he wanted to count. His brain felt fevered. Sophia instructed him to take a deep breath, and then a second, deeper this time, then a third, followed by a string of sighs. She began to breathe in time with his breath, encouraging slow and full inhalations, pausing for a moment, sipping some air at the top before releasing the full content of his lungs, slowly, ever so slowly. Their bodies began to synchronize, and Sophia knew that the door was slowly opening for the work that was to come. She laid her hands gently on his breasts, feeling the rise and fall of his chest under the warmth of her hands. She held her palms and fingers in perfect stillness, allowing his body to acclimate to the intrusion of her touch. The fragrant oil of the sacred almond trees down the road warm to her touch before she began a slow glide upward toward his collarbone. Sophia's strong fingers moved along the ridges of bone before sweeping outward and down, repeating the scan with her fingertips and hands, searching for the places that felt locked through trauma or injury. She could feel the blood moving under her touch, restoring the body to its original wholeness. The sensation was of little pearls of warm light dancing in response to her invitation to play. Sophia wondered how it felt to receive it. For a moment, she became the body on the pellet as well as the healer, moving her hands along its contours. This was entrainment, the time of alignment with the seeker. Before her hands moved, Sophia had said the ancient prayer of opening. May I be a vessel for your way, goddess. Through me, may this seeker remember the deeper channel, the remembrance of the time when spirit and body were one. The return yes. This was the invitation for the goddess to enter, and enter she did. A suffused warmth descended over the body of the seeker and the temple worker, a cessation of all mental gymnastics, a return to the child's body of supreme possibility and union with all that was alive, a warm acceptance of this knowing, this animal self as primal and valued, precious and trusted. What long ago was bartered and compromised, his true essence returned to him. His loss of the ability to trust not only the people around him, but the quiet voice that spoke only to him, had seemed the price of becoming a man. It was a price he was willing to pay. Everyone had to at some time, didn't they? Bartered away before true value could even be established, the ability to trust had to be summoned from the long locked portals of his heart. Sophia held it lightly in her hands, sun drenched with the higher vibration of this newly refreshed body. Before the sacred work of reunion could be considered complete, this next step needed to be taken. As the vibration rose, the connection needed to be held constant for the safety of both parties. Once the body had been touched and opened, the energy was moved from top to toe on both sides. This was the last piece to lock into place. As Sophia held her hands to the crown of the man's head, she allowed them to rest there a moment. She felt heat at her core, between her hips. It began as a tiny point of warmth, which grew to the size of a baby in her womb. There was a buzzing feeling, like the sensation of 1,000 bees circling within her. After it filled her, the sensation moved up to her solar plexus, where it filled her heart and caused tears of gratitude and joy to fall. Everything was heightened and deeply saturated with color. This was always her favorite part. Almost as quickly as the heat and buzzing had arisen, it was gone. Along with it, the separation between body and spirit was dissolved. The man who laid on the pallet before her was different from the one who had sought the goddess's help an hour and a half earlier. This man smiled with his whole body as he lifted himself from the floor in one fluid motion, free of pain and regret, reunited with the joy he had not felt since he was a young man, with his whole life before him. Time felt different now, liquid. His allegiance was no longer to past recriminations, but to a future made simple and holy by the act of taking the next breath, confident that whatever he needed was already here. Nothing was wanting. The tear was repaired. The two embraced and separated, looking clearly into each other's eyes, mirroring the goddess, without shame or pride, undefended. They were two halves of a whole, reunited for this sacred moment, male and female, one. A strong breeze moved through the little room, carrying with it a very small owl who circled overhead once before, silently flying toward the opening to the deep blue sky. Sophia looked up and smiled at the joke. White doves are sacred to Aphrodite, but this had been a tiny owl, one of Goddess Athena's emissaries. Yes, wisdom. Thanks, Mama. The end. We hope you enjoyed this. Have a blessed day.